So what's your statement 418? So this you know, the sameness, the identity of all, yeah, that we were talking about in the concise fivefold practice. So here, maybe better translation here. The notes of at the very end of the notes for 417, Sobich gives us a quote from Doje Sherab. It says, the realization that there is no own nature in all phenomena of samsara and nirvana, and they have never existed from the beginning, is called, quote, realization of all phenomena as sameness, unquote, sameness. The sameness of all phenomena. Same in what way? Same in that they have no own nature and have never existed. As in, existed in the way we confusedly think they exist. Not saying that they never existed, period, but they never existed in the way that we have mistakenly thought of them as existing. As in, oh, existing beautifully, existing not so beautifully, existing uglily, existing likable way, existing unlikable way. Those types of existences are called impossible existences. It is impossible for anything to exist inherently beautiful or ugly. But we confusedly think that those types of existences are possible. But Buddha points out that the only kind of existence that is possible is the existence that is interdependently or dependently arising existences. Then whatever is dependently arising, then they do not have these fixed, that something is fixed, good, as in desirable, or fixed, not good, undesirable. So statement 418, let's look at. People claim that the path is traversed, the path is covered, travel on, traversed, through the different gradual realizations, such as the path of seeing and of samadhi, such as going heroically. So this is really interesting, this statement, because elsewhere you will find, in fact, we already covered this in chapter 6, the view, meditation, conduct chapter. In there you'll find that Gilbert Rinpoche emphasizes that insofar as the path to liberation is concerned, when we say that things are achieved instantaneously, I don't know if you remember that, he says, there we're not saying that suddenly you attain. He says there, instantaneously is a poetic way of saying that for some, attainment is achieved in a very quick way. So quick that it looks like it's all at once. So in the commentary, it says it's like watching a very strong archer shooting a target. like a practice target. So a practice target consists of like a pad, which is built out of layers and layers of cloth. So a very strong archer, when they shoot, it looks as if, right, the target is penetrated instantaneously. But Kyoba Rinpoche says, it's only instantaneous in a poetic sense, instantaneous. Because no one would assert, he says, not he says, but the commentary says, no one would assert that the first layer of this cloth was penetrated at the same time as the 45th layer and the same time as the 122 layer. Yeah, the way that this arrow penetrates is still first layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer. But because it's a very powerful archer, it just, rather than, like me trying to push this arrow in bit by bit, and that's very gradual. So in that context, it's emphasizing how there is a progression that occurs. So here, seemingly, it sounds as if, wait, is he like now contradicting himself? Yeah. Then I want to say this also, we should not be so afraid of contradictions. Yeah. I think Nalanda style is try to reconcile all contradictions. And I think in some ways that creates then new problems, But if we can understand that, Buddha, Kyoba Rinpoche, Milarepa, they are not like, they didn't sign like some document to say, I will always agree to say the following. According to the philosophy that you guys have developed and said that I subscribe to, I will always speak like this. No. They always spoke what was necessary to be heard. That which is true, that which is helpful, that which is well said and well received. That is how they speak, right? So in a way, we should not be so afraid of contradictions, and we don't need it to try to defend, right, Kyoba Rinpoche against people who say, oh, you're not speaking consistently. Our job is to really try to understand when this particular statement is made, what is he pointing to? What is the take-home lesson? So I'm not studying the Gongchik and spending time with you to defend it against some other criticism, but it's to look at it and say, what can this mean, What is being emphasized? So what is being emphasized in this statement is, so his statement is, we maintain that one completely traverses all the stages and paths through a single realization. So what's interesting here is he wants to say, insofar as the realization is concerned, as in finally realizing Buddha, it is a single realization that obtains different names at different levels of that realization. As opposed to those who say that at different parts of your realization, your gradual realization, you achieved the path of seeing. This is the 5 paths. Path of seeing is the third. The first one is the path of preparation or accumulation, the path of joining, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, the path of no more learning. This is one system of talking about the Bodhisattva's progress into the 5 paths. So he says, so Kyoba Rinpoche is not disputing that the Buddha did teach about the 5 paths as these 5 stages of development, or for that matter, the 10 bodhisattva bhumis. But he wants us to understand that this is not talking about 5 different things that you're working at. You're working at a single realization that becomes more and more profound and thorough, complete. So he says, we maintain that one completely traverses all the stages and paths through a single realization. So overall sense of Gongchik, the material in Gongchik is unsurprisingly, the style is more of one, whole, complete. So this notion of one or same or complete, is very central to Gyalpa Rinpoche's way of looking at things. Rather than lean in the direction of dividing things. Again, there's a time and a place for dividing things, seeing clearly, because it's like we call splitting hair, right? So in some Indian context, Indian Buddhist context, to as I was saying to the group last night, to be accused of splitting hair is considered praise. You're just splitting hairs, It's like, oh, yes. And I can split it, 42 parts. And each of those parts, I can further split it, to 21. So it's like a competition in splitting hair. It's a point of pride, to be able to kind of like more subtle. In a way, that's what, scientists are doing. Like quantum scientists, look at the atom. At one time, we thought, that was the be-all and end-all, But no, there are parts to it. Then more there are parts to it. So there's a time and place for that kind of dividing and categorizing and splitting. So then some traditions, like I would say the Sakyapa, lean in that direction, Sakyapandita. Whereas Gyalpa Rinpoche represents that side that leans more in the direction of comprehensive oneness, unified. So until Buddhahood is attained, which is the absolute truth luminosity, which is the gnosis initially attained on the path of seeing with pure and impure stages. So here, what is Buddhahood? Well, another word for it is absolute truth luminosity, probably an expression found in tantric materials, which is the gnosis, which is the wisdom, initially attained. Already on the path of seeing, you already attain, as in you already have access to this knowledge, to this wisdom. But at that point, the pure and impure stages are mixed. Or with realizations named first stage, as in first bhumi, and so forth is traversed. So quoting from this one Tibetan text called Tingye Zingi Ming, Namten La Bappa, it says, many synonyms teach the one meaning. So there are many words, there are many terms, but they are all talking about one thing, but in varying degrees and stages. Moreover, in this tradition, as in Gyalpa's tradition, it is like teaching the slightly clear freedom from proliferation as the one-pointed state. So these in this section, Chodra is going to use a common grouping of meditative, or not grouping, a charting of meditative progress in Mahamudra, called the 4 yogas of Mahamudra. So the first stage is called one-pointedness. Sechik. The seeing of the essence of the freedom from proliferation. Todrel. Second. The realization of the body and appearances of all of samsara and nirvana as true reality, as the one taste, the third stage, and the freedom from meditative and post-meditative states, and so on, as the absence of practice of the 4 yogas. So the 4 yogas are one-pointedness, freedom from proliferation, one taste, and no more learning, beyond learning. These are the 4 yogas discussed in Mahamudra material. Acharya Haribhadra says, since we focus through the path of seeing, which is as explained on what is not different from actualized reality, the paths of seeing and practice are not different, which is the next path, the path of practice or the path of meditation. Therefore, the characteristics of the path of practice are not separately established. Moreover, the commentary on the Madhyamaka Avatara, maybe, says the aspects of gnosis are expressed as stages. So the same wisdom, the same gnosis have different aspects, and therefore we talk about stages. Thus and so forth has been explained in detail. Again, quoting from another text called Abhisamaya Lankara, as everything is agitated in an instant, when a person sets the string of the water wheel in motion in a single go, gnosis is instantaneous. Manjushri Namasangiti says, through the particular of a single instant, one achieved perfect Buddhahood in an instant. Moreover, the Lord Drigumpa, Jigten Sumgan says, as the many joints of a bamboo stick all split apart with a crack, by splitting open one by one, the gnosis are realized one by one. Again, the Lord of Buddhas, Ranashri, again. This is the style of I think, Tibetan writing, you know. If we were a college professor in an American university, we would say, quit doing that. Meaning, stop changing the names of the same person. Yeah, the Lord of the Buddhas, Ranashri, is no other than Lord Drigumpa. So you have to understand, you know, the stylistic difference, and don't go, hey, who is this? You know. He says, where apart from this realization of true reality has the king of the Shakyas during the 3 innumerable eons obtained certainty? To rely on the authentic guru is the path of accumulation. To obtain the teachings of the pith instruction is the path of preparation. To see the nature of one's mind is the path of seeing. To practice continuously is the path of practice or cultivation, gom, meditation. And to actualize one's mind is the path without impediments, no more learning. So beautifully, you know, Kyoba Rinpoche summarizes the 5 paths. For me, at least, you know, again, in my limited, you know, where I am, the 5 paths, you know, path of accumulation, path of preparation, or sometimes called the path of joining, the path of seeing, the path of practice or meditation, and the path of no more learning. I've always you know, yeah, those are kind of abstract, you know, like who knows, like what, where you are and all of that. All I know is not yet path of seeing, you know, because not really seeing yet, still groping around. That much, it's like, oh, that much I know, But here, Kyopa Rinpoche translates the five paths into something that I think we can all relate to. So he says, during the three innumerable eons, which is how long it took, it says Buddha Shakyamuni, to achieve Buddha Shakyamuni, to achieve the state of Buddha. How long did it take him? 3 innumerable eons. But what was he doing during these 3 innumerable eons? You can say he accumulated merit, you can say he purified obscurations, this and that, but fundamentally, realization of true reality. So everything, all the stages, is just working on this single realization of fundamental reality. Yeah. It says, okay, now, you want to talk about the 5 paths? You want to talk about the 5 paths that you can kind of relate to and know what to do with it? Then know this. When you begin to rely on the authentic guru, not just some random, right? We can have lots of teachers. But guru here is talking about a Buddha-like figure. When we rely on the authentic guru, so when we rely on the authentic guru, then that is when you are on the path of accumulation. Then when you obtain the teachings of the pith instructions, this is the path of preparation. To obtain, I find this kind of interesting, It doesn't mean that, you attended the teachings. Here it says you obtain. That is, you actually received. The teacher could be giving teachings, whether you receive or not, that's a different matter. So when you obtain the pith instructions, then you have the path of preparation. And when you see the nature of your own mind, then that is the path of seeing. Then, when you engage in practice of Mahamudra continuously, that means stabilizing. That is what meditation is. That is what practice is. And when you have finally actualized this mind, then you are on the path of beyond learning, the path without impediments. So the notes here, according to Dorje Sherpa, people claim that the 10 stages and 5 paths, right? Those are the classic ways of talking about how a bodhisattva progresses through the various stages. That the 10 stages and the 5 paths are the mundane and supramundane paths, such as of preparation, application, and seeing, on which many accomplishments are achieved, such as the samadhi of proceeding heroically up to the final Vajra-like samadhi. Again, remember, earlier there is one statement that says, all samadhis are one samadhi, which is the Vajra-like samadhi. So this is the same point. Thus, through these realizations, one proceeds sequentially through stages and paths, and when higher accomplishments arise, the lower ones are left behind, like a bridge that crosses a river or the steps of a ladder. Jigten Sumgön, however, maintains that all is traversed through a single realization. Chogi Dragpa identifies this single realization as the absolute truth luminosity. His very brief statement means that one initially attains the wisdom of the absolute truth luminosity on the path of seeing. Even though it has stages, it is always the same wisdom. It is not the case that when the higher stages of accomplishment arise, the lower ones are left behind. So now, Sobich helps us to see. Another issue at stake here is, for those who tend to say that there are all these different stages, different paths, different achievements, different meditative states. One wrong implication of talking like that often comes up is the idea that when you have achieved something more profound, what you achieved earlier is left behind or discarded. Kyoba Rinpoche is concerned that we don't think of our progress to Buddha state as leaving behind earlier realizations. It might seem like a very fine point and maybe irrelevant point to you, but again, if you look around, that's what I said, and maybe it's offended some people when I say you need to use Gongchik to kind of look at how you have been hearing, especially modern teachers, talk about what the path is. Because there are subtle points of confusion that often circulates. And in studying Gongchik, it's not so that you become critical and become like arrogant, and say, oh, I know better. No, it's not about that, or that Rinpoche is wrong, or that Khenpo is wrong according to Gongchik. It's not about that. It's really about us not end up with the wrong take-home lessons. So when you hear some teacher teaching, like Mahamudra outshines all the other realizations, Dzogchen outshines all the other realization. Often, in a subtle way, we kind of think, oh, the other realizations are, Dharma for dummies. Here, Kyoba Rinpoche wants to emphasize that if it is really a realization, it's not so much that you give it up, it's that it begins to grow. It's not like you give up. Because this is again related to how some people might think, oh, now I'm on the Mahayana level, I can give up the Hinayana stuff. I see people, like people that I like, people that I get along with, some teachers, one example, making a comment about the role of anger and how to relate to anger. So he's making a very tantric Vajrayana, so to say, point, that you work with the anger or you transform the anger. So basically, the people who write, on the response are probably his students, and they're like, yeah, yes, yeah, yes. And then somebody who is wrote something like, yeah, there is this idea that you have to abandon anger, purify anger. And so this teacher responded by saying, oh yeah, that's a hang-up. Not hangover. That's a hang-up. That's a Hinayana hang-up that is, in here irrelevant. Yeah? So if you apply Kyopa Rinpoche's standards, Kyopa Rinpoche will say that is not a skillful way to say it. That the need to discard anger is a Hinayana hang-up. It's a Hinayana concern. Now we are on Vajrayana. We have no concern of that sort. Buddha says, Jigten Sumgön here is pointing out, you don't discard the Hinayana because you think you're now on Mahayana. You don't discard Mahayana because you think you're on Vajrayana. It's not about discarding. It's not like relating to those things as, oh yeah, that's Dharma for dummies. Fundamentally, all the other stages, right, higher stages, right, is to help us to deepen what we recognize in the early, at the very beginning stage. If indeed it was an understanding, it was a correct understanding at the beginning. There could also be wrong understanding, which of course you have to discard. But the correct understanding at the beginning, whatever happens after that, is not something new that you're trying to gain. Whatever happens after that is all the methods and the process that is necessary to bring about the complete realization of what was initially understood. Get that? This is an important point. And so what was initially understood, now needs to be, the implications of that needs to be fully realized and understood. And then you have, quote unquote, higher stages to work on, to get to. But it's not by abandoning what came before. It is not the case that when the higher stages of accomplishment arise, the lower ones are left behind. So the analogy of like a house and the various levels is better than the analogy of like a road that goes, like, oh, I've already, left exit 22. Now I'm in exit 49. That has more a sense of leaving behind. Yeah. So that analogy actually doesn't work so well with what Kyopa wants to emphasize. So what Kyopa wants to emphasize is best understood in the analogy of going up. In the analogy of going up, 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 up. So you cannot, say, oh, I'm done with the foundation of this building, No need that anymore. I'm already at level 8, I'm on the 8th floor. Who cares about the foundation? You'll be in trouble, The oral tradition.
I was thinking about, it makes me think of, just because I'm learning algebra, I don't forget how to add and subtract. I'll use it sometime.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's not that, you abandon what you learned before. Now the full implications of your ABC, then you can compose masterpieces. The full implications of learning musical notes. On that basis, now you can compose amazing masterworks. The oral tradition provides an example similar to the one mentioned in Vajra Statement 114. In the example, the sun of the spacious valley does not provide much warmth when it clears the distant mountain top, but performs such functions as gradually and increasingly protecting against the cold. Yeah, so actually it's in 114 that this a similar point is made. So 114, quickly. Yeah, so I think that is the samadhi statement, maybe. One engages in all paths gradually. Okay, 114. Yeah. Accordingly, independent of its position in the sky, the sun always warms the spacious valley. But as it rises higher and higher, it functions more and more effectively. This is also the case with the gnosis of absolute truth luminosity. In our commentaries, the single realization theory is translated into the system of the four yogas of Mahamudra. The Rinjangma, Dorshema, as well as an instruction by Jigten Sumgen, discuss this point in slightly greater detail, but differ to some extent in their terminology. Yes, so according to Choki Drakpa, the first yoga is the slightly luminous freedom from proliferation, taught as the one-pointed state of the four yogas. The older commentaries, sorry about that, this phone interruption. The older commentaries speak of the true reality being slightly luminous. Rinchen Chanchup identifies in general the gnosis of the four yogas as the innate gnosis free from proliferation when describing the 10 stages of the levels of the absolute truth of luminosity. So here is basically reconciling again, some of the differences. I don't know if we really need to go through it, but if you want to see, chart out all the differences, you can go look more carefully. Oh, he already charted it out for us. Page 366. Summary from Rinjeng Changchup Rinjangma. This is good. Since the initial realization of the first stage first bhumi of bodhisattvas, up to the Buddha stage, is the thing to be ascended. When a noble being, an Arya, when one is an Arya, it is not so that from stage to stage, the previous stage is abandoned after the realization of the higher stage, and that a new realization arises that is different from the other. Until the Buddha stage, the stages of the absolute truth of luminosity are, as a convention, labeled 10 stages. Meaning these are more and more profound and vaster, both deep and vast realization that increases. Certainly, in terms of talking about the path, there are things to be abandoned and there are things to be cultivated. Kyoba Rinpoche will say that. That which is abandoned are the confusions. So you do abandon those. But the realizations that have arisen, right, you don't abandon, so-called the initial one, for higher ones. They become more clearer and clearer and clearer. Yeah, so good. Questions, comments? Any questions, comments? No?
Maybe.
Good. Maybe. Okay.
Like, I think at some point, when you're on the higher stages
Mm-hmm.
and forget about the lower ones, it might even impede you to get to a higher level. It's like
Yes, of
you
course.
almost have to use those things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, yes. And then we could say, that in the end, maybe it wasn't really a realization. You think you're higher now, but no, it's not like that.
Dr. Lai,
Yes.
how does this view compare with the analogy of the monkey swinging through the forest, and when he
Yes.
grabs the new vine, he has to let
Yes.
go of the old
Sure.
vine?
Yes. Yes. So that one, that one is related to one way of understanding the tenet systems when studying the tenet system. The more formal, there's the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, Prasangika. So that analogy I often give when we are talking about that kind of study. Yeah. And in fact, it is that kind, I'm glad you brought it up, because it is that kind of analogy over applied will lead to this idea that, that is abandoned. Yeah. So now Kyopa Rinpoche's statement should nuance our understanding of the monkey swinging from branch to branch to cross, to the other side of the forest. Should nuance that and say that what, often when we use like analogies, metaphors, we can overstate or understate, right? If we get stuck with the metaphor and not understand that the metaphor is used in a very specific way. So there it is emphasizing not grasping to what is comfortable and not challenge yourself to see beyond your comfort zone of like, I believe this. So in order to go outside of your comfort zone to see more clearly, you have to do the giving up, so to say. But the giving up cannot be. It's an over application of the metaphor if we think that, it means, on the Hinayana level, I see anger as an afflictive emotion. On the Vajrayana level, I see it as beautiful. Anger is just fine, No, that's, that's a. So then this idea like, Vajrayana, I'm allowed this, I'm allowed that. So then already we looked a lot at, Kyopa's teachings on, what is allowed and what is not allowed. What does the Buddha recommend to whom, So for the most part, until your eighth bhumi, Buddha will not recommend doing what Captain Compassion did.
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
You just mentioned the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and what was the fourth? What was the fourth one?
It's Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka.
Madhyamaka. Are those the four major schools that were discussed in the Nalanda scheme of unification?
Oh yeah, it's a Nalanda system. Yes, the four tenets. There are some really excellent translations of these tenet systems. If you look around, one of the earliest Western like centers of Tibetan Buddhism, academic, was University of Virginia, where Jeffrey Hopkins, who is schooled in the Gelugpa system, was the main scholar, producing a lot of students translating all these various texts, especially related to these tenet systems. So I studied at University of Virginia, but I got there kind of, at the point where Jeffrey Hopkins was not so active, because he was actually ill for a period of time. Turns out that it was Lyme's disease. At that point, still no idea what was going on. Anyway, he produced a lot of students. His dissertations, his PhD students, he would assign them different key texts in the Gelugpa tenet system studies. He would basically assign a topic to, okay, you translate that, I'll give you a PhD. You translate that, I'll give you a PhD. You translate that, I'll give you a PhD. And so many of these books are translated. And if you have a knack for it, it can be very interesting. And I read those books, and I, took classes, some. And so then, of course, now more and more translations of Nyingma ways of studying the tenet systems, and Kagyu scholars studying the tenet systems. So all of these tenet systems are studied by Sakyapa, Gelugpa, Nyingmapa, Kagyupas. Yeah. But I personally think and believe that the early Kagyu gurus, especially Gampopa, Jigten Sumgun, Pamadrupa, it's not like they don't know these tenet systems. They do. But for them, it's of secondary significance. But there is a certain point, I think, in the development of Tibetan Buddhism, where Buddhism has become, at a point where Buddhism became firmly, undoubtedly kind of like part of national identity, so to say. Then at that point, scholarship became really important. Yeah? In part, it's because it's also a point reached by Gelugpa power in control. And given Gelugpa emphasis on learning, and given Gelugpa looking very kind of admirably to Nalanda tradition, so then tremendous emphasis on scholarship. Also, scholarship is demonstrable, can be demonstrated, can be measured, Realization, it's hard to measure. So in a way, it makes sense, that in the public domain, what became valued culturally is scholarship. And scholarship involves, mastering debate, mastering, the tenet systems, philosophy, because it's demonstrable that you can demonstrate your learning. How are you going to demonstrate your realization? The idea of demonstrating realization is really the opposite of realization. But
thank you.
At the end of the day, right, what the Buddha cares about is realization. What Milarepa cares about is realization. What Gampopa cares about is realization. What Kyoba Rinpoche cares about is realization. And what we should care about is realization. So Sangha meeting tonight, New York time 7 to 9. Yeah, for those of you who want to participate, I will send to the WhatsApp group another message for the Zoom details. I want to make it clear, just because you're participating in Gongchik, there's no expectation or kind of like naturally you will participate in Wednesday Sangha. These are two separate, so don't at all feel like, oh, I'm expected there. No, you're not. And then because you participate on Wednesday's Sangha night, there's no expectation or like, oh, you'll be involved here. It doesn't work like that. I don't have these kinds of expectations. All of us have different circumstances and conditions. Yeah.
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
I just wanted to add something. I really appreciate the way this is being presented, and not in terms of a path or a stage, but this metaphor of the house or the architecture where it's this layers. And it just feels good. Before, from my own wanderings in different Buddhist paths, there's this thing where Hinayana's better because it's the original. Mahayana's better because it's more advanced. And then, there's all this confusion. And I could see how, but there's similarities. Why do they have to be pulled apart? So I love how here it's brought together, right? And it's like the Kagyu, or at least the Drikung Kagyu way of unifying and bringing together. And it makes more sense. I was just thinking it's maybe like a Gaudi building where the exterior can be so impressive, like Vajrayana and all these techniques and even the art, that we forget there's a structure, but there is the structure.
Yes.
That is needed. So this has just been really helpful. Just wanted to say that.
Good. Yeah, Gyoba Rinpoche's way, in the Gongchik, it's holistic, it's brought together. So earlier too, when I'm teaching, following the example, and some have pointed, like scholars, who study Buddhism in America, have pointed out that chiefly is Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, because he wanted to offer his new students a more systematic approach. So he emphasized, you start with the Hinayana, then you do this so much, then you proceed to the Mahayana, then so much, and then you proceed to the Vajrayana. And so the Shambhala system has this, Not his intention, but because of the clear structure that he provided his hippies, he really cleaned up all the hippies, Then they went the other direction. Then they started wearing even military uniform, to have straight backs. Those hippies, So they all became not his intention, I'm sure, but because of that structure that he was advocating, indirectly, everybody started to think of it in terms of this, then this, then this. Then that is replicated even by those who don't agree with it. That structure casts a long shadow, especially in the West. And now, because Westerners are writing Dharma and writing about Dharma in a very sexy way, this shadow is cast back to Asia, where Asians, urban Asians, wanting to read more exciting and sexy Dharma, are importing the shadow to Asia and replicating, this stage. I think I've said before, like when I first met Khenchen Rinpoche, who was at that point the only really Drikung Kagyu teacher teaching in the West in the early days, I have, in my head, like, why Rinpoche doesn't teach it in a more clear way, systematic, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. I never heard Rinpoche dividing things this way. And there was a part of me that goes, if only Rinpoche would be more systematic, Now I understand, because, it's not like that. Especially for Kyopa Rinpoche, it's not like that. Maybe if you're a Sakyapa, you can defend this. But even that, I would say Sakyapas in Asia, they don't divide things this way. But here in the West, like people would say, is that a Hinayana practice? Is that a Vajrayana practice? And, always like, what practice is it, But more traditionally, no, it's just practice, It's an integrated whole. But some kind of stages, some kind of, has to be there, We're still working in a linear world, in a linear sense of time and progress. So yeah, there's some linearity, but that linearity has to be understood against or within the context and background of a comprehensive, holistic, single approach. Changchu Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ge Banam Ge Gyurche Ge Ba Nyam Ba Me Ba Yang Gone Gong Du Bel War Sho. Okay, ta-ta. See some of you tonight.
Ciao for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.